I have 12:02 on my clock, so let's get started. I see that some people are still joining us, which is wonderful, but let's get started because we have some excellent content to get to today. First, let me welcome you to the Ohio River discussion series. We genuinely appreciate that you joined the discussion. The Ohio River discussion series is an opportunity for communities to share their knowledge and passion for the Ohio River. And this monthly series was created in 2020 by the Ohio River Recreational Trail. And this year, 2021, the series was expanded and additional partners were added to provide additional content and additional support. The partners include the Ohio River Recreational Trail, the Ohio River Basin Alliance, the Foundation for Ohio River Education, or ORSANCO, and the National Park Service. My name is Lisa Cochran, and I'm the Communications Coordinator for ORSANCO, and my role today is facilitator of our discussion. I will move through the agenda by introducing the speakers, serving as a timekeeper, and facilitating the question and answer session at the end. Our next slide shows the routine housekeeping items. So as a typical routine housekeeping item, please mute your microphone unless you are speaking and disable your camera unless you're presenting. And throughout this discussion, please send all questions and comments to the chat. Of course, we'd like to handle everything verbally, but with the number of people, that would be challenging. Also, please be aware that this discussion will be recorded and published later. Another housekeeping item to point out is we are using the GoToMeeting format. And this platform is not as popular as Zoom and some of the others, but it's the same basic format. And the one feature that I do want to point out is your ability to change your view is typically located at the top. And your options are view everyone, view who's talking, active cameras, and hide everyone. Now, if you are willing at this time, would you be willing to chat your name and organization to introduce yourself to all the attendees? So if you'd like to do that, please do, and of course that's totally voluntary. And remember, throughout this discussion, if you would like to share links to your organization or content that you'd like to share, please use chat for that information. Thank you. Our discussion agenda is now on the screen. Today's discussion is titled Understanding Microplastics in the Ohio River Basin. We have excellent speakers today with a wealth of information. Both of our speakers will present, and then we will have a question and answer session after both speakers are done. So it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Suhail Al-Abed. Suhail, we will make you presenter. Give us a moment to allow you to share your screen. And while you're doing that, I'm going to read a brief bio. Dr. Suhail Al-Abed is a research chemist at the U.S. EPA Office of Research and Development, Center for Environmental Solutions in Emergency Response in Cincinnati, Ohio. His research activities include environmental applications and implications of nanoparticles, removal of heavy metals from waste streams, development of methods to detect and characterize microplastics in surface water, and tests for waste evaluation for disposal and reuse scenario. He authored and co-authored more than 100 peer-reviewed journal articles and 6 book chapters. He is a fellow at the American Chemical Society and chair of the Environmental Chemistry Division of that organization. And so we are very pleased to have you speak. Dr. Al-Abed, I see your screen. Are you ready to present? Well, thank you again. And it is my pleasure to introduce our second speaker. And our second speaker is Dr. Sherry Mason. And I see that we're already sharing her screen, so that's wonderful. You don't need the moment, but if you'll give me just a moment to read a bio of Dr. Mason. Dr. Sherry Mason earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at Austin. She completed her doctorate in chemistry at the University of Montana as a NASA Earth System Science Scholar. Her research group is among the first to study the prevalence and impact of plastic pollution within freshwater ecosystems. Among her accolades, Dr. Mason has been selected as an EPA Environmental Champion in 2016, awarded the Excellence in Environmental Research by the Earth Month Network in 2017, and earned the Heinz Award in Public Policy in 2018. While she continues her research endeavors, she has also recently moved into a new role as Sustainability Coordinator at Penn State Erie Barnard College. Barrend, my apologies. Obviously, I'm not from Pennsylvania. I apologize for that. We are very lucky to have you presenting today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all for joining us. You have two chemists on board here, so we will do our best to make this topic approachable to everybody. So I was asked to talk about the impacts and solutions of microplastics. So start with talking about the impacts. And I'm going to start this by focusing on a couple of studies that we have and then expand from there. So we did a couple of studies looking at things that people ingest, starting with sea salt purchased in the United States. We found an average of 212 particles per kilogram of sea salt. I realize that's an unusual kind of unit for many Americans, especially. So to put that in context, if you take the maximum amount of salt that we should be ingesting every day according to World Health Organization guidelines, that would mean that we would be consuming about 180 particles of plastic just through our usage of sea salt. In this study, we also looked at beer that was brewed using Great Lakes water. I studied the Great Lakes. We've established that there are microplastics in the Great Lakes. So the question was, if we brew beer using this water, is there then microplastics within that beer? And what we found across the 12 different brands that we looked at was an average of basically 4 particles of plastic per liter of beer. There are no guidelines on how much beer you should drink. I think since we have the EPA on the call, you put that charge to so we just made an assumption that an average American drinks 1 beer a day every day of the year, in which case you would be ingesting about 500 particles of plastic just through your beer ingestion. And then we also looked at tap water. And in this assessment, we actually obtained 159 samples of tap water from across the globe. And what we found was that on average, about 5.5 pieces of plastic per liter of tap water, which actually means that there's more plastic within your tap water on average than within your beer. So beer is better for you. If you account for how much water you should be drinking every day, again, averaging across sexes by World Health Organization guidelines, you would be ingesting about 5,000 pieces of plastic through your tap water. So these first 3 consumer products were the basis of one of our papers. And really, when this paper came out, I thought a lot of people, when they saw that there was plastic within our tap water, would really kind of demand change on that front. Instead, a lot of people said, oh, well, I'll just drink bottled water. As though wrapping a product in plastic would make it have less plastic. It's really kind of surprised me. So we decided to do a global bottled water assessment. We looked at a total of 259 individual bottles of water from 11 different brands purchased across the globe. These were the top selling brands either globally, things like Aquafina, Dasani, Nestle Pure Life, or regionally. So for example, in China, the top selling brand is Wahaha. Looking at the same size particles as what we looked at with the tap water, we found twice as many particles within bottled water, meaning that you would be getting twice as much in your yearly consumption if you drank nothing but bottled water for your water consumption. With this study, we were able to go down to smaller sizes, and when you go down to even smaller sizes, you see a dramatic increase in the number of particles, which means a dramatic increase in what you would be consuming. These two studies, along with others by other laboratories, form the basis of this review article looking at the human consumption of microplastics. So they looked across different human consumables. I should note that they could only account for 15% of the average human diet, so 15% of the caloric value of an average human diet. So it's a very small portion, and yet they found, that and on average, you're going to be consuming between 74,000 and 120,000 pieces of plastic, across an annual basis. So this is where you hear that, if you've ever heard the statistic, that an average American eats a credit card's worth of plastic each week. It's based upon this study, the vast majority of that coming from bottled water. So if you want to reduce your plastic ingestion, the starting point would be to not drink bottled water. So the point of kind of starting with this is just to lay the foundation for the fact that we are consuming plastic. There's really not any doubt about that at this point, but what does that matter? Well, it's not just the plastic or the polymer that's of concern. It's really the fact that plastic, when you manufacture it, has a whole suite of chemicals that are added to it, plasticizers and flame retardants and UV stabilizers and colorants. And a lot of these chemicals are very well known, have very well known human health impacts. Most notably, they're endocrine disruptors, many of them. And what this means is that they mimic the natural hormones of your body. The natural hormones of your body, by the way, hormones are chemical messengers. They transmit information, from your fingers and your toes to your brain, and your brain back out to the body. So they help to transmit that information. And so when you disrupt those signals, well, it's kind of like that game of telephone that we all played in camp when we were a kid, right? When you mess up the transmission of information, it can have a wide variety of human health impacts. Some of the human health impacts that are known to be associated with chemicals that are within and on plastics, well, a good starting point is to talk about the impact it's having on our ability to reproduce. Most notably, sperm counts are going down, the motility is decreasing, the shape of sperm is being affected, and this isn't just for men, it's also affecting women with regard to fertility issues. And so you see an increase in infertility issues across the globe happening. It is also leading to increases in certain kinds of cancer, most notably for men, prostate cancer, and for women, earlier onset of puberty is leading to increases in ovarian cancer and breast cancer later in life. Certain types of learning disorders and neurological disorders like autism and ADHD are associated with these chemicals, as well as obesity rates. And when I'm talking about obesity rates here, I'm actually specifically referring to studies that have been done on children under the age of 6 months. So this isn't, they ate too much McDonald's and they didn't go to the gym and therefore they're obese. This is literally a reprogramming of our DNA. And should all of this sound just like crazy science, want to just point out kind of this chronology of books by scientists, dating back to 1962, Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, all the way up to just last month, this book, Countdown, by Dr. Shauna Swan, was released, How Our Modern World is Threatening Sperm Counts, Altering Male and Female Reproductive Development, and Imperiling the Future of the Human Race. And her chapter 7 in this book is specifically focused on plastics. So this is this is science, well-founded, that has been out there and we're gaining more information about it all the time. But as we're talking about the human health impacts of plastic and these chemicals that are through the chemicals that are added to plastics, I would be remiss if I didn't take us back to the very starting point of plastics, and the fact that plastics are composed of polymers, which are, a polymer just means many units that are strung together. These are long chained chemicals, and the starting material for those polymers are fossil fuels. This here is an image of the largest refinery in the United States. Another image, this is located just outside of Houston in my home state of Texas, and in an area along the Gulf Coast that is referred to as Cancer Alley. Because of the emissions from these oil refineries, the very starting point of plastic and the impact that they're having on people that live in those communities. My point being that plastic doesn't just affect humans at the end of its life, it affects humans all the way at the beginning and every step along the chain. Should the Gulf Coast of Texas seem very far away from you, well, the Guardian has asked if the push for plastics is going to turn our area of the country, Appalachia, into the next Cancer Alley. And the reason for asking this, of course, is the prominence of hydrofracking in our area because we live on top of the Marcellus Shale. Hydrofracking is largely, conducted in order to extract natural gas or methane. This is also known as dry gas in the industry. But in our area, it also leads to the production of wet gas. Wet gas is lower in concentration of methane and higher in concentration of ethane and propane, meaning that it's not as good for the use of fuel for natural gas, but it is really good for the production of plastics. And this is why in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, we have this facility being built by Shell. It is going to take, it's called the cracker plant. There's two sister facilities actually planned for just over the Ohio border in Ohio. And the purpose of these facilities is to take that wet fracked gas and turn it into polyethylene and polypropylene. So they're called ethylene cracker plants. They're going to take ethane and turn it into ethylene and turn that into polyethylene, and similar with propane to propylene to polypropylene. And this doesn't just happen or doesn't just affect us here. The Mariner East Pipeline project, which is currently being built through the state of Pennsylvania, going out to Philadelphia and Marcus Hook. The whole point of this pipeline is to take that wet hydrofracked natural gas and ship it to Scotland to produce plastics. They really advertise this pipeline as being, good for energy production, but it's not for energy production at all. It's for plastics production. So my point again is just the fact that plastics are impacting people locally, regionally, globally, and from the starting point of extraction at every point along the chain to the microplastics that we find in our water that end up coming back to us in our food. So everyone is probably now really depressed. So let's talk about solutions to this, right? I mean, this is the problem that is facing us, and what are solutions to this? And anytime I talk about solutions, I like to start with this image. And I don't know about anybody else, but when I see this image, I immediately want to reach into the computer and turn off the flow of water, because you have this overflowing sink, and immediately what you want to do is turn off the flow of water. Then you can talk about cleanup. And that's really important for us to keep in mind. This is a huge problem, but a lot of the solutions tend to be focused on the cleanup part. And if we're cleaning up, if we haven't turned off the tap, the cleanup is pointless, right? Because you're going to continue to have that water flowing out. And the same is true with regard to plastics production. So my colleague Sue Hale mentioned, the exponential increase in plastics production, most notably kind of continuously kept up with by Roland Geyer out of the UC Santa Barbara, to the point in 2015 we were making 448 million tons of this material. To understand how much is still present on the planet, you'd integrate under that curve. What I like about this graphic from National Geographic is that it breaks down how that plastic is being used. And, again, that exponential increase, that's the tap that's turned on. And for the record, plastics production, they want to quadruple production by 2050. Quadruple. They want to make 4 times what they're making now, 4 times that amount over the next 30 years. And we're already kind of drowning in this. So when we're talking about turning off the tap, the plastics industry will tend to focus in on the fact that they create all of this wonderful materials for healthcare, for building and construction, and they do. I'm actually not anti-plastic, but you see that these are a pretty small portion of the overall plastics production. A lot of plastics is used for a very short period of time at the things that are at the lower end of this graph, and I want to focus in on what makes up half of plastics production, and that is single-use packaging. So these are materials, as they mention here, used less than 6 months, many times used for minutes, out of a material that lasts for decades to centuries. And so really when we're talking about turning off the tap, it's kind of focused on how we eliminate our use of this single-use plastic. And there are so many products out there to help you make this transition on a personal level. That being said, even if all of us change our habits, there's an upstream from us. So I encourage people to make personal changes in their habits, but I also encourage you to look at legislation. And the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act has been reintroduced into Congress this year. And it has a number of policies that make up this overall kind of suite of programs, mostly focused on extended corporate responsibility. When you go to the store to buy a product, you are looking for the product, not the packaging, right? And so making corporations responsible for that packaging is how we actually create a recycling infrastructure that works. It's how you make the changes that really need to be put into place upstream from us as consumers. And with that, I'm sure I have used up my time. I want to thank all of the agencies that have supported me over the years, and I think we're time for questions.
Excellent, thank you. I can relate to those, I believe, slide next to the last slide, making those personal challenges. It is baffling to me when I go to the grocery store thinking I am definitely going to buy very little plastic, but it's challenging. The items that I want often only come in one form. So yes, and I didn't make the connection to beer either. I knew about water and bottled water, but I didn't make the connection with beer. That's tragic. Thank you. We are very lucky in that both of our speakers provided a great deal of information in a very short period of time for a very complex topic. And so what we'll do now is we will handle as many questions as we can, understanding, of course, that we may not get to all of the questions. The good news is that Orba will send a follow-up email to all the attendees, which contains the contact information for the speakers. So if we miss your question or you think of something later, you can contact the speakers directly. And I'll ask the speakers now, can you both confirm that your cameras and microphones are enabled? And I'm going to scroll through the chat. I've already seen, I think, 2 to 3 questions. And the other attendees, feel free to add your questions as you think of them. The first question I see is, are there simple tests or observation strategies to assess the amount of microplastics in local streams or the Ohio River? I'll ask both of our speakers to address that if possible.
Who do you want to go first?
Suhail, if you would, please.
Okay. No, there is no simple way, unfortunately. However, as I mentioned in my talk, it's the amount of information that you want to gain. I showed that pyramid for the different analytical techniques and also the different extraction techniques. You could start with a simple microscope to look at the water. However, microscope is not necessarily going to give you the right size or the type of polymer or the type of aggregation of the plastic. Now, somebody would say, well, maybe I don't care about the size, or maybe I don't care about the polymer. Then the microscope is good for you. But if you think the smaller particles could enter, let's say, the fish stomach, for example, and I'm not a biologist and I'm not going to be one, but for example, what they're finding out, I keep emphasizing the fibers, these clothes that we wear, it's extremely hazardous for aquatic life. So an aquatic biologist showed me actually what would reside in a fish stomach. And he showed that the fabric, since it's elongated, it would not come out that easy through the system, through the fish system, and it makes them feel full. So when they are full, then they're not going to eat, and then they lose weight, and then eventually they'll die. So the shape of the fiber, obviously, it is important. So if you are interested in looking at those effects, then you should find the right analytical technique or instrumentation that do this based on the effect of the polymers. That's again what the second presentation very well put it together with the effect on, for example, children and so on. So polymer chemistry is important. And one more mention before I take too much time on this, but the polymer in the bottle that you have right now in your house, that's not necessarily going to be the same structure that you're going to find in the river. Why? Because it would be exposed to sunlight, for example, and sunlight will do photolysis or photodegradation of the polymer and changes the structure. So
I apologize for that feedback. We'll mute that individual.
okay, I am. So anyway, that's my answer and for the question. I hope I did cover it. So
absolutely, and I appreciate the blunt response in the beginning. The answer is no, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Sherry, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, we just focused on microplastics, but I want to just point out that a lot of microplastics start as macroplastics. And so while there's not easy ways to find and identify microplastics, we need a lot more information about kind of that macro debris, and that's really easy for citizen scientists, quote unquote, to do. You know, we have Dr. Suhail, well, Dr. Alabaid, sorry, Suhail.
That's okay.
Showed an image at the beginning of his slide of a litter boom. We have 2 litter booms here in Erie that I'm actually using as a research study. So we're collecting all of that macro debris, the bags, the bottles, the straws, the cigarette butts. We're collecting all of that. We're identifying it. We're categorizing it. We're weighing. You know, that's stuff that's really easy for people, just an average, you know, person to do. And there's lots of apps out there, like the Marine Tracker app, and others that you can use to quantify that information and share it with the scientific community. So I encourage people to do what you can, and don't just focus on microplastics. Microplastics are a problem for sure, but if you don't have the resources to do microplastics analysis, you can probably do macro.
Yeah. If I want to add something, this is a great point, Dr. Mason, but also I want to add there is a hypothesis between us scientists right now. If you find macroplastic, very likely you find the micro and the nano at the same time, because it always starts with a big piece of plastic. And then it goes through this chemical and physical weathering.
Yep.
And those are depends on the water chemistry, the photochemistry, the waves, for example, in the ocean. There are islands in the ocean because of the currents that collect actually the plastic in island shape areas. So, but there is this hypothesis. It has not been proven, but a lot of indication is if you're going to find the big piece, you very likely you're going to find the smaller pieces.
Yeah, they're going to collect in the same place because they're driven by those surface currents and others. Though I would have refrained from calling them islands, because it makes like you can stand on it, and it's not like that. It's more like a smog of plastic.
You got it.
It's so spread throughout the water, you know. I mean, you can go, you know, it's important, I think, because like I live on the Great Lakes, you know, and people, if they go sailing out on the Great Lakes, they look in the water and they're like, I don't see plastics, you're just crazy. And you're not going to see it. It's very much enmeshed within the life. It's these small particles, you know, 75% of the plastic that's in the Great Lakes are less than 1 millimeter in size. And that's just based on the data we have now. It's probably even more like, you know, 90%, because we're not accounting for, you know, nanoplastics.
Right.
And so, you know, I think it's really important to note that you're not really going to be able to see these things frequently. That doesn't mean they're not there. You know, it's the stuff that you can't see that's of most concern. It's those things that are less than 100 microns that can make their way across their gastrointestinal tract, be carried in your body, end up in your liver, your kidneys, your brain. You know, there was a study came out just like 2 months ago talking about, they looked at, oh goodness, babies, embryonic, the sac, and found it on both sides, both the maternal side and the fetal side. And so these things are making their way into our kids, you know.
I think that's a very, forgive the interruption, I think that's a very powerful word choice, smog. I think for those of us who may not understand all the technical details, I think you're right. The idea of an island is very easy to visualize. And it comes with a certain assumptions, but a smog is obviously very different property. So as a non-technical person, I think that's a powerful word choice. So, well, I'd like to move to some more questions. I see several questions, and obviously I mentioned I doubt we'll get to all of them. Let's see, I believe this is for Dr. Mason. Are there studies that demonstrate a connection between the hormone disruptors and microplastics?
That's really difficult to do. I mean, sometimes people want science to be able to do things that science can't do. understanding that the point that I just made, that the fact that fetuses are exposed before they're even born. How can you prove that when I get cancer at the age of 50, it's because of a microplastic that I was exposed to from sucking my binky or playing on the carpet or chewing on a plastic toy, or that I got when I was exposed through my mother when I was a fetus? I mean, there's no way to kind of tease that apart. And so the best we can do is talk about how these chemicals are correlated, right? And so really, you know, somebody I know commented that you should see our references. I provided 4 books. I provided the references in my slides for the 2 studies, both of which are open source. I encourage people to go seek those books out. Countdown is an amazing book. Dr. Shauna Swine has done an amazing job in this field of endocrine disruption, and she talks in that book about these studies, what they look at in the blood, what they look at in all of these different, in order to create these correlations and to understand how these things are connected. But there's just no way, we have no humans that have not been exposed to microplastics that we can then expose to microplastics and see how it affects them. Plus, you know, there's a whole, like, would that be even legal? But that's just kind of so we don't really, we'll never, I don't think we'll ever be able to kind of give that level of you know, kind of answer. The most
Understood. I appreciate the response, and I'm sure a lot of us were thinking that as well. I see another question that I think would be good for both speakers. Is there data on the water that is filtered through pitchers such as Brita and Waterdrop? Because obviously our first speaker spoke about the Mill Creek, and then our second speaker spoke about tap water and beer. But I think that's a question that a lot of us. Suhail, would you start?
Yes. I hate to use the commercial name for certain filters, so we don't disqualify certain filters and others. It really gonna depends on the manufacturer. And if you ask me if we do find it in filter water, yes, we do. I find it even in my DI water system. Now, I have to qualify also. DI mean deionized water, which goes through a lot of more filtering probably than your household filter. But I have to qualify some of these too for everyone. You got to remember, if you're wearing a sweater or you're wearing a shirt that has these fibers or these plastics, and you go to your filtered water in your house and you take and you take a sample of that, I cannot for sure tell you if you find a plastic in the water, if it's coming from your shirt or from that water. So to be honest with you, that's a more of a research question more than you could actually go and say that this filter works then, you know, better than the other filter, or filter paper works better than non-filter paper. I mean, I'm sorry, water. So there is no straight answer on something like that. But if you're concerned, there are ways of doing that. You could do a control experiment by, and this is what we do when we do research. We want to make sure there is no cross-contamination. I mean, even the people I introduced, and at least in my acknowledgement, those guys, they have to wear, even their lab coat has to be cotton. I cannot use the regular lab coats that we use for my other research. And I want to make sure, I always make sure I tell them, try to wear cotton. The poor people, you know, sometimes they have to go and make sure that day, if they're going to work in the lab, they have to put certain clothes on. So just to be aware that there is a lot of issues with, you know, determining that type of analysis. So that's the long answer.
Very good. Dr. Mason, would you like to add anything?
To my knowledge, there's no scientific studies on looking at water filters. In our studies of wastewater treatment plants, we did some sampling before and after certain mixed media filters, which are very similar to like Brita filters and things like that, and didn't really find any difference before or after them. And there was a study looking at karst formation. So frequently I get questions after talking about tap water and bottled water. What about if you're on a well? Wells tap into aquifers, which are typically below a karst geologic or immersed within a karst geological formation. And we find microplastics there too, because the microplastics get pushed through the soil, and we have some kind of recent studies showing that. So I think filters at best would delay, but they will not remove plastics over time. So my kind of quote on this is, we can't filter ourselves out of this problem.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking at my phone right now and I have 1:01. So the webinar was intended to last until 1 p.m. So I'll say to any of the attendees who need to leave right now, we understand fully. If we didn't get to your question, please remember that we will send a follow-up email, and which will contain the contact information for our speakers, because I'm scrolling and I see some questions that are very good that we will not be able to get to. But for those who maybe have 5 more minutes, if you're willing, let's try to get 2 more questions if the speakers are willing.
Sure.
Very good. I see. What are the impacts on fish flesh from microplastics?
I think this is, yeah. Again, I'm a chemist and engineer. I don't. I don't know exactly, but all what I can think of, and Dr. Mason probably is better to answer this, is if the fish stomach chemistry, I know like ours, it has you know, hydrochloric acid. Okay, I don't know what's in the fish. Hydrochloric acid, usually the acid in our stomach will leach some of these polymers, and it could introduce certain chemicals to our body. But I don't know anything about the fish physiology to answer that question specifically, but I think that's probably the dominant factor.
Yeah, I'll just go back to the fact that we're both chemists and not biologists. I mean, I think that there was one interesting study that I remember, it's been a few years ago, showing that they are stuck to the skin and the organ, you know, the fins, where they breathe, and so I think it could affect their ability basically to breathe. But I'm not a biologist, so that's yeah.
Or they could physically, like I said, they could make the fish feel full by accumulating in their stomach, and without the fish being able to extrude them through the body. So, but yeah, unfortunately, maybe you needed a third panelist with a biology or aquatic biology background. They could answer.
Well, I certainly appreciate that response. Yeah, absolutely. We'll refer that to the biologists.
Yep.
So thank you. Let's do one last question. And then we'll wrap up for today because I appreciate everybody's patience. I recognize we all have a lot to do today. The last question for today is the measurement of microplastics in bottled water from the water itself, and does that imply that plastics are leaching from the bottle? So when you're looking at bottled water specifically, is there any way to determine how much is from source water and how much is from the bottle itself, if I understand the question correctly?
Yeah, I understand. So first of all, when Lisa and Heather remind me, and I'll send you guys those studies and you can send them out to everybody. They're freely available. But basically looking, and I couldn't do this. I couldn't share obviously all of the data with you guys in the short time that we were allowed to present. But basically in tap water, it was 98% fibers, but in bottled water, it was 65% fragments. And the point of saying that is that there's a different source. For tap water, it's largely probably coming from atmospheric deposition. So it's coming from the water being in contact from the air. And so it's not really an issue of water treatment plants not doing their job. They do their job very well. And so if I have any, I probably should have said this earlier, because if we had any water treatment operators on here, I want to make sure that they understand that I'm not pointing the blame at them, nor are we putting the blame at wastewater treatment plant operators that they don't remove plastics that are in wastewater, because that's not what they were designed to do, although they do it actually fairly effectively well. Up to 99%, depending upon the size, are removed by wastewater treatment plants. With bottled water, 65% of them were fragments, and that really indicates that the contamination within bottled water is coming from the act of bottling the water itself. It's not from within the water. It's the bottling process. In fact, 4% of the particles that we pulled out of bottled water actually showed signs of lubricants, industrial lubricants. So it's coming from the machining and the twisting and the actual, it's an industrial process. It boggles my mind that people think that somehow bottled water is clean. It's an industrial process. You have machines that are making bottled water. That's, you've got, so it's an industrial process. And so keep that in mind. And so are things chipping off? For sure. Definitely. They're chipping off. And we saw that. Even the act of opening the bottle of water, you have plastic rubbing on plastic. We found it was a red cap, and we found a big piece. You could see it when you filtered it, a big piece of plastic that came off of one of our bottles. And it was the act of literally opening the bottle that led to that contamination. And it's not just our studies that have been done since then, not only on bottled water, but other sodas and other things that are bottled and packaged in plastic lead to plastic contamination. So if it's packaged in plastic, you're eating plastic.
Well said. Well, my phone is 107, and I know we all have a great deal to do today, so let's wrap up this webinar. And I want to thank our speakers, all of the attendees. I'm sure enjoyed the content. You took a very complex topic and gave us some very important information, and we're thrilled that we will have you as contacts for future questions. So thank you so much, speakers. We appreciate it. And thank you, attendees. We appreciate the discussion.
Thank you all for being here. Thanks, Suhal, for sharing the stage with.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sherry. Hopefully we'll get in touch. Thanks. Bye.